Hey guys, today we will be discussing fuel pump testing with an amp clamp and a Labscope. I'll be showing you how to scope the fuel pump and the best settings to use on your scope to quickly reach your diagnosis. The conventional way to test fuel pumps uses a pressure gauge, typically tapped into the rail or fuel lines, and often a test light or multimeter at the fuel pump connector to verify you have your power and ground. And while it can be an effective test, in some cases the only test needed to reach your verdict, it has a few downfalls. And using just a pressure gauge is the equivalent to going to the doctor with an illness and the doctor only taking your pulse. Using a lab scope gives you an in-depth view of exactly what is going on inside that fuel tank, similar to an X-ray, CAT scan, or MRI. Now, the easiest way I found to test a fuel pump, and of course this is after you've verified you have PCM or BCM control of the fuel pump relay, and this video isn't going to be about how to verify that. We're only looking at fuel pump waveforms by themselves right now. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to remove the relay and we're going to jumper pins 87 and 30. And of course, especially new cars, but not all cars have removable relays. Some have a fuel pump driver module or internal relays, built into the fuse box that you can't remove. So you have to find other means of testing. I'll get into that later on. And there's also fuel pump fuses you can remove and install, a fuse buddy or another jumper wire in place of the fuse. Well, what we're going to do, of course, 85 on the relays, 85 and 86 right here and here, and they're your control. They're just the low current signal from the PCM or BCM to turn the fuel pump relay on. What we're going to be focusing on is 87 and 30 right here, and we're just going to, run a loop jumper wire. It doesn't have to be fused because the circuit already has its own built-in fuse right here. So we're just going to be jumpering between 87 and 30. Let me see. So we're just going to be jumpering between these two. And we're just going to install our low amp probe right there. And what this gives us the ability to do, if we're in out in a parking lot where the tow truck driver dropped the vehicle off, or by ourselves, we don't have the ability to have somebody come over and turn the key or crank it for us. Use jumper that, and a lot of these are powered all the time, and some of them are powered off the ignition switch. So in some cases, you turn the key on if you want your fuel pump to run. And what's this going to do is it's going to pass in power to the fuel pump. And whoops. Fuel pump is grounded down here, so again, fuel pump's just going to turn on. It's got a in this on this vehicle has a regulator. Some are return style; they'll have a regulator. You're not going to overpressurize the system, so the car doesn't even have to be running. You can just jumper it and monitor your waveform. What you're going to see when you first jumper it, you're going to see an inrush of current. You're going to see a spike, and then you're going to settle out to a nice, even, hopefully, waveform that should look something like this. This is a good waveform right here. And what these individual humps are from the commutator segments on the fuel pump motor. Okay. Now, the whole idea behind testing this way is to not only get a full picture of what is going on inside the tank, but to do it quickly. And knowing your scope and how to set it up will be a big benefit. So you want to practice, especially on a known good vehicle. That way you know what a bad vehicle is. Most fuel pumps run between 5,000 to 8,000 RPM. Of course, there's variables. Some might run 4,500. I don't know if any run over 8,000, but I'm sure there are. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to be focusing on these pumps that run about the speed. And most pumps run, around 6,000 RPM. So I like focusing on that 6,000 RPM number because when it comes to scope setup, it's really easy. I know we have if you look down here, our whole view here, there's this 20 milliseconds. If you look down here in this lower corner, we're at 2 milliseconds per division. What I like to see when I, first hook up a scope, and I say I'm in a parking lot, I got a no start, or even if I'm in the shop and I have a vehicle that's running poorly or has a lean condition, I usually like setting up the scope on 10 milliseconds, across the entire screen, like this. It's 10 milliseconds. You can quickly look at it, and you can tell whether the pump is moving fast or moving slow. Basically, our math to figure out pump RPM, you divide 60,000, which is 60,000 milliseconds in a minute, by how many milliseconds it takes for this pump to make a full revolution. Now, each pump has 8 commutators, or most pumps have 8 commutators, I should say. I'm sure there's some with 6 or some with 10, but generally, most vehicles have 8. And again, that's why it's good to practice. You can immediately see if your car has a different number than 8. So if you have 8 humps within this 10 milliseconds, you know that the pump is at least, is spinning about what it should be. I'll get into what faster and slower speeds mean in a minute here. Now, pump RPM is an important factor in seeing the health of a pump. Slow pump will obviously deliver less fuel and will result in a lean condition or poor performance. And like I said, the easiest way to just get a quick visual on how fast it's going is just boom, set it to 10 milliseconds. If you find yourself setting it to 20 or 50 milliseconds to see all 8 segments, then you're going to be in a little bit of trouble there. You found your issue, and you have to figure out why it's moving slower. And some, you might widen it out to 20 milliseconds if you have one that's running 5,500 RPMs. That would be, about 11 milliseconds to do a whole sweep. So just keep that in mind. Now, on the way we're going to do this, of course, if you're on a Pico, you would set your milliseconds per division to 1. Of course, this is just a demo screen, so we're stuck with 2. But you would set it to 1, and you would see here on the snap-on scopes, you'd set your sweep to where are we at? You would set your sweep here to 10 milliseconds, and you have 10 milliseconds across the screen. Like I said, if you find yourself changing it to 20 or 50, you have a problem. Now with current, most fuel pumps run between 5 to 10 amps. Some might be a little bit higher, and some lower current or lower pressure pumps might be 3 or 4 amps. But again, I think that would be pretty rare. Most are between 5 and 10. And again, as we're practicing on good pumps, and knowing how much pressure your system is running is a good benefit to you. Like I said, on the snap-on scopes, you just start off with 10 amps. See 10 amps on our trace, 10 amps up here. If you turn your key on or hook your jumper up and it's your current's down, you can either quickly hit the inverted button or you can flip your probe around the other way on the wire. It's not a big deal. Now, higher pressure pumps are usually, the 55 to 60 psi pumps are usually around 9 or 10 amps or so. Where the lower pressure ones, I know like the Fords, the mid-90s Fords, early 2000s Fords that run 30, 35 psi are usually around 5 or 6 amps. And again, they usually run a similar speed, just at that 6,000 RPM, general rule of thumb there. A fuel pump with high RPM and low current is an indication of no restriction. So you have you might be out of gas. Um, the line running from the pump to the top of the fuel pump module might have a hole in it or have come completely loose. Um, may have a restricted fuel pump sock there at the bottom of the pump, or a damaged fuel pump impeller where it's just spinning away and there's just nothing there to spin. High current, low RPM means the pump has some resistance, such as a clogged fuel filter or maybe a pinched line. You know, I've seen somebody pick the vehicle up and missed the lift point and crushed a fuel line, and now you have a lean condition or you know, even a no start or low power, and that line is pinched is the same as a restricted fuel filter. A failing pump will usually have a very erratic waveform caused by burned commutator segments. This is not my picture here. It's just a great picture of what exactly these commutators look like inside the pump. You can see this one over here has some burned segments. This one's real worn, has a lot of wear to it there, and this one's in real bad shape. And you count, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 segments there, so you get a good idea of what we're looking at when we're seeing these waveforms. But these would all be examples of, you know, burned out pump, you know, no starts, intermittent no starts, things like that. Then we get into touched on earlier vehicles with fuel pump driver modules, and how to test those, because you can't simply jumper the relay, you know, where you can't just go to the fuse with a fuse buddy, because those pumps are pulse width modulated by the driver module, and you're going to get a real erratic waveform. It's not going to look like this. You'll have high spots, low spots, and pump speed will be slow, because the driver module is actually controlling pump speed to control pressure. So if you have a low demand for fuel, that pump's going to be running slow. So it's not an accurate test of the health of a pump. You'll be able to obviously see if the driver's module working, if the driver module is working, but you know, it just isn't a good test. So what we want to do is go straight to the pump. You know, unplug the pump or go to the driver module, unplug the driver module, get your wire diagram, and you know, either hook your power probe, or for the power probe haters, you know, a jumper wire, and just go, you know, power and ground to the pump. Pump will turn on. Most of these pumps have built-in reliefs, or the fuel pump module have a relief valve in there, so you're not going to overpressurize the system. You know, you hit 60 or 70 psi, and you'll get a good look at the what the pump is doing, especially under that pressure. And you just hook your amp clamp around one of the your power probe wires, either power or ground. Doesn't matter which one. Just don't do it around the main cable, because you'll have both power and ground are inside of there. Now, I'm going to go through some examples. Of course, this is a healthy pump right here, and this is going to be, I think, in no particular order. But these are just some captures that I have saved. And again, I don't save every one. If I'm doing parking lot triage, you know, typically just use the Snap-on scope, because it's real portable. Got there, see what I have to see. But I usually don't save these, so unfortunately I don't have a ton of good examples, especially ones that are just straight up bad. But I'll go through with ones I do have saved to kind of share a little bit. Okay, this first one, this is a Mercedes, 2002. Its complaint was they'd be driving down the road and it would just cut off on them, almost like it ran out of fuel, but gas gauge was showing full. And now this usually happened when they were around a quarter tank. And what you can see down here is I'm around 50 milliseconds, and I told you I don't like starting off my my scoping with 50 milliseconds there, because usually you get a big view and you can't really focus in on what's happening. But if I started off at the 10 milliseconds, I would only see this view right here, which obviously I started off there, I saw that, so I immediately zoomed out to 50 to get a view of what was going on inside this tank, and I see this mess. And also, since we had it cutting off, this green trace here, this is fuel pump voltage. I had the back seat lifted up. I was scoping directly around the fuel pump power wire, and then I was back probed into the power wire to get voltage so I could see exactly what was being commanded on this thing. Okay. So next, we're going to go, I went down to 20 milliseconds, and you can just see we have a mess here, and we're at 20 milliseconds. If, let me pull up some markers again. Unfortunately, I don't have, usually I don't mark RPM on these because I just do a calculation in my head. But if we mark here, and then we go 8 segments, is, you know, count to 8. Usually I look for a good identifier, like this would be this line right here and line right here. It's really easy to recognize. You want to go to the same point on the pump. You want to get the same commutator segment. So it's really easy to find an identifying point like that. And look, and we're at, let's call it 18 milliseconds, which is, I believe, 3,300, you know, right around 3,300 RPM, which is not good. Okay. So I got the thing running. You know, we got power. It's running good. Doesn't have lean codes. It's actually not doing too bad. So I just got it running in the bay to see what's going on with it. So finally, it stalls out, and I'm able to actually catch it, which is not a simple task to do on the Snap-on scopes that don't have a huge memory buffer. But I actually caught it. And what happened, the vehicle had just cut off right back here. And apologize for always bringing up this marker here. But what you notice here is we're still in the same 20 millisecond sweep, but we have 16 commutator humps showing up in the same area we just had 8 showing up. So what happened here? And you also notice our RPM dropped, or our current dropped. Before we were up here around 8 amps. Now we're down 3 or 4 amps, and our speed doubled. So what happened here? Fuel gauge is still reading a quarter tank, but knowing the design of the tank on this Mercedes, it's got a dual saddle tank and one pump. And what happens is the pump has to feed both sides of the engine, or the pump has to feed the engine and draw fuel from the other side of the tank. And the pump was strong enough to feed the engine, but it wasn't strong enough to draw fuel from the other side of the tank. So the tank, the side of the tank that the pump sat in, just ran out of gas. And that's what we're seeing here is it ran out of gas. And then, of course, the vehicle shut off. We had voltage and all like that. And the vehicle simply cut off because it straight up ran out of gas. So that's good to see. You know, it's conclusive. I was able to get this pinned down, you know, within minutes after the thing basically ran out of gas in the bay. Without this testing, you know, we'd been disassembling stuff, guessing. You know, it wouldn't have been a easy task to find out. And then this is our new pump. Again, I left it on the same 20 millisecond sweep as before. And of course, the new pumps take a little while for the brushes to seat in. So the waveform on new pumps might be a little erratic, nothing crazy, nothing bad. But you see, you know, pump speed is way high. So we're good to go. This vehicle is fixed. And I didn't bother hooking back up and checking voltage. I knew what we had there. And here we are, zoomed in 10 milliseconds again. You can do the math real quick. We can, you know, go basically from here to here. We're about, call it 8 milliseconds. That's, I think, around 7,000 RPM. Just do it in your head. Again, that's why I do it this way, is you just do it in your head. If you want to bring up cursors, they do have cursors that you can pull up here. Again, you can just do the math in your head, and I'll show you later on. They do show a delta value if you go up here to data and change the screen a little bit. This pump here is off of a 96 Silverado with a central port injection, and those are very, very sensitive to fuel delivery and pressure. So this thing had a drivability problem, had some lean codes. So I decided right away, you know, scope the pump, see how much, or see what the pump looked like. And I also had a pressure gauge on this one because pressure is very, very important on these particular trucks. Usually I won't hook a pressure gauge up, but again, it's always a good idea if you're unsure. And we had good pressure. The pump speed is a little slow. We're right around, you know, 11 milliseconds. So it's a little slow. It's 5,500 RPM. Nothing terrible at all. Pattern isn't great at all. But this wasn't the cause of our problem. But I was able to let the customer know that, hey, this pump is failing, and it's time to start planning. I don't know when it's going to fail. It could last another year, 2 years, 5 years, or it could fail next week. But the pump isn't healthy, so you're able to tell a customer that. Say you get a customer to come in with their truck, and they say, hey, I'm going on this 2,000-mile trip towing my camper to give my truck a good check over. And you're used to looking at coolant hoses and looking for leaks, stuff like that. Well, in 2 minutes you can hook up to his fuel pump relay, or even on the newer Silverados, they have that prime port. You just hook a jumper lead right from the battery to that prime port, put your clamp around it, and you can tell the guy, hey, might be a good idea to start planning for a fuel pump. So that's basically what this is showing here. This was I don't have it, it's not shown down here, but it was like a 95 Lexus, I believe. It was a complaint, it was an intermittent no start. And when I got to it, I didn't turn the key on or anything. I checked for fuel pressure. We didn't have barely any fuel came out of the rail. So, I knew we would be having a fuel pressure problem. So, pulled the relay out, jumped at the relay. Well, the pump came on and the vehicle actually started. So this is with the vehicle running, and you can see we just have a flat line, and we're at 5 amps, and you can see a few little humps, but you just can't see any details there. This pump is worn out. And what I did here, this is the same pump showing the same, same everything. I went in, I changed to AC coupling, so you can actually get a view of the changes in current and voltage, so you can basically I could get a look at how much RPM we were running. It was actually running a little over 6,000 RPM, which is pretty good. But I had a pretty good feeling this was the cause of our no start. So we went ahead and put a pump in it, and here you can see a nice healthy pump. Again, same RPM, but and this car had over, I think, 270,000 miles on the original pump, so he got his money's worth out of it. And again, this is without showing the segments up there. This was a Jaguar that was towed in as a no start, and on first look at it, you have pretty much no idea what's going on here, so I'll explain. This is zoomed way out. Of course, I believe I started off at the 10 milliseconds. I just had to zoom way out to see what was going on. And I also had to change to a 5 amp scale because I was over, the Snap-ons, they have a 1 volt scale, 2 volt scale, and then it jumps to a 5 volt scale. So I went to the 5 volt scale, which would be 5 volts would be 50 amps. 2 volts here would be 20 amps. So we're right around 22 amps on this fuel pump, and it's a flat line. So, and then you see this over here. This isn't commutator segments over here. Okay, I'll get into that in a little bit. This was key turned on and prime, and then prime turned off. I sat for a second, and then I cranked it. This is basically a relative compression test. The pump is locked up, pulling 22 amps, and the pump is locked up. And then cranking it, this is just your compression peaks. And then I stopped cranking, the pump primed and turned off. We were down to no current with the key off. So that pump was locked up. It needed a new fuel pump. This one actually beat on the tank, was able to drive it in, but I don't like beating on the tank until you know what is going on, because it's like it's a crime scene. You're disturbing the evidence if you go beating on the tanks. And this is a even further zoomed out view of the whole event. And this is just our settings on the Snap-on scopes. Like I said, start off with 10 amps, you can go up to 20, you can invert them here. And again, we're at 10 milliseconds here. Same thing. This is if instead of going into amps, you just go into volts. 1 volt's 10 amps, 0.1 volt per amp, basically on these on the low amp probes. And more of the same, 10 milliseconds. This is Snap-on's version of pulling out the rulers and measuring your RPM. We can see down here our delta. Delta has changed. So 5.6, you would say 5.6 was our complete revolution here. you would just divide 60,000 and then divide by 5.6 and you would get your pump RPM. And I don't want to ever see anybody having this screen up and then showing me or sharing their screen capture, because it really shrinks it down on these things. So always, if you can, have this screen up. Let me zoom in on this one. This is an older capture, and I just did it out of curiosity. What we have, this is the red trace is an amp clamp, again either at the fuse or the relay. Actually, I know it was at the relay. The green trace here, I was actually just checking a theory I had that you could check voltage drop across the fuse, and this is AC coupled, so I was able to see the peaks. So without an amp clamp, you can effectively measure your pump RPM. You know, the pattern is a little garbled, so you couldn't get anything too conclusive from this, at least on this capture here. But you would be able to measure your pump RPM from here to here. So you can actually test fuel pump RPM without an amp clamp. But for the price of them, go ahead and get a amp clamp. I'll show you. I'm not associated with AES Wave, but you cannot beat the price on these. You know, 89 bucks for a low amp probe. There's no reason not to have one. And if you're worried about the quality of them, I'll show you another picture. This is a Pico amp clamp. This is AES's amp clamp. You can, you know, I don't know what magic goes on inside of them, but you can make your own determination from this picture. So I think that $89 would be the best $89 you've ever spent in your career. Am I just about done? I think I have a few more. There's a relay. This is on Picos. This is a fuel pump with 180,000 miles on it. This is on my own personal vehicle. On the Picos, it's not that important, you know, unless you have a problem. You immediately want to see, you know, you got your screen pulled up and your laptop is away from you and you're in the vehicle and you want to be able to see it. Yeah, you would set it on your 10 milliseconds to get a quick visual. But oftentimes you can just be zoomed way out, and Pico's ability to zoom in on the capture is one of the great things about it. So it's not as important as the snap-on tools. But you can see down here in the corner, in the lower right-hand corner, we're at 5,500 RPM. We're between, you know, it's call it 10 amps there. So 180,000 miles. This pump is still good, and I like to check my pump, you know, once a year, just make sure it's still good. If I see something bad with it, I would just go ahead and change it. But that one is still original. This was a no start on a Ford Taurus, or intermittent no start. When I got it, it actually fired right up. I pulled it in the shop. These do have a drive. This was a dual cam car. It had a driver module, and so I went right to the pump, unplugged it, hooked up, you know, power probe, hooked around it, and I got this, and right away, pump's bad. You know, that's the cause of the no start. Customer on this one actually already replaced some parts, so I had a good idea of what we were going to be dealing with. But this is conclusive right here. You know, and actually our RPM, if you look down here, we're at 6,400 RPM. The pump is actually working. It's just if it stops in one of these dead areas, it's not going to restart until, you know, you bang on the tank. And this is that same vehicle, just a zoomed out view, and you can see, you know, where I zoomed in on it. And I believe that's everything I had to share. Don't think I had anything else. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave them. Please subscribe to my channel, and feel free to share this. All of these pictures, except for this one, were mine, so I don't want to take credit for that. So thanks for watching, and I'll probably make another video on some other stuff. If anybody wants to see anything in particular, just leave it in a comment and I'll see what I can do about making a good video on that.